In this video, we're going to be walking through the most common Intel and Ryzen processors found in laptops today. And we're also going to include the latest Ryzen 4000 series to see how they stack up against Intel and Ryzen in general, if the performance is true, if we're seeing great improvements from Ryzen, and if it is the processor to switch to for creative professionals. That's right, this video is specifically for creative professionals. So whether you're a graphic designer, video editor, or photographer looking for your next laptop, then you're in the right place. My name is Benji Kaiser. If you're new to the channel, this is where you're going to find the latest tech news and tech terms demystified. This is the Don't Tech With Me show. Now, let's dive right in because I want to get into this content. This is going to be more of a talking, conversational piece, so I'm going to be glancing down at my notes, making sure I don't miss anything and keeping you guys informed. There's also an entire processor breakdown list that I'm going to be working through in this video. So if you head down into the description below, I've categorically laid out all the processors so you can see which processor is good for what type of work, whether it be graphic design, whether it be photography, and then you can also see which one's better than the other. Now, this is off of a lot of different benchmarks, whether it be video editing tests or simply core tests. That is, the processor's been put into an app like User Benchmark or Geekbench, and we see that the numbers put the processors in a specific order. So I've organized all of that. I have about 2 to 3 months worth of research and organization into that sheet, so you're definitely going to want to grab that resource. And there's also some links to laptops in that sheet. And if you do use that, I will get a small commission, but at no extra cost to you. All right, let's keep moving forward. We're going to start by the history of Intel and Ryzen processors. So historically, Intel has held the crown for laptop processors for as long as I can remember. My first MacBook Unibody had an Intel processor. My first MacBook Pro had an Intel processor. And my current Dell XPS 15 has an Intel processor. So they've substantially made some really good developments over the past decade, but more recently, we've seen them start to slack off in making those developments, especially in the terms of their architecture. They haven't changed the architecture. That means like the build, how the processor's assembled in quite a while. We're hoping to see that change since Ryzen has now launched their new architecture, the Zen 3, and so we're hoping to see some changes as we move forward. So let's talk about the actual numbers though. In 2010, I had a MacBook Pro with an i7-M620. My second MacBook Pro in 2015 has an Intel i7-4980HQ. So between 2010 and 2015, I saw a 197% increase in performance. That processor is comparable to Ryzen's 3750H or their 3700U. So you can kind of understand where we're sitting with the processor. The Ryzen 3700U is actually only about 5% faster than Intel's 2015 i7-4980HQ. So you can see that up until this point, that is until they have launched the latest Ryzen 4000 series, Intel has really set the pace. So we're going to see how these Ryzen 4000 series processors stack up against the competition. And that's going to be coming out here in just a minute after we work through some of those preliminary thoughts and really get you a good foundation to understand which processor is best for you. But we'll keep moving through this video. The current MacBook Pro 16 in 2020 has an Intel i7-9750H. So from 2015 until 2020, we saw a 114% increase in performance. So the question is, why did we see an 83% decrease of the performance increase between the latter years? You know, we saw a great increase in performance for the 2010 to 2015, but we saw it decrease from 2015 to 2020, and I'm thinking that's because they really slacked off on the development of their laptop processors. Now, they could be putting into the works something fantastic right now that we all have no idea about. They've got a ton of money, a big R&D department, so that is possible, but there's no guarantees. With the release of the Ryzen 4000 series, I must say I'm really impressed by the performance we are seeing of the new processors. But I have my reservations about casting my full recommendations on these processors, and I will talk about that coming up later in the video. Like I said, we're about to jump into the processor recommendations as well as how the processors are structured with the numbering system and the lettering system, so you can definitely follow along with the Google Sheet. So before we get into laying out the chart for all the best use cases of certain Intel and Ryzen processors, I'm going to walk through the numbering and lettering of the most common processors available with current laptops on the market. This will help you understand what all of the gibberish means and then equip you to make an educated decision of your own. So that's my goal with this video and this series in general, is to help you understand what you're actually buying. So the Intel numbering system, we're going to jump into that right here. So when it comes to the Intel numbering system, the Intel i3 is for everyday tasks, browsing, and long battery life. That's where you're going to find the best use case for the Intel i3. The Intel i5 is going to be for business, design, plus some light video and photo editing. The i7 series is going to be for workflow, heavy design tasks, basic 3D animation, plus moderate to advanced video editing. So that'd be a lot of 1080p, 4K, etc. And then we have the i9 series, and that's going to be your highest level of performance, 6K plus video editing, advanced 3D animation, and so on and so forth. Now, there are a few things that I will note. For instance, you can do some 6K video editing with some of these i7 processors, specifically the latest i7-10875H. That's going to be a great processor for maybe some 6K video editing, but you're going to want to make sure you have a GPU that is strong enough to support that, the graphics onto the screen. All right, moving on to the lettering system. The K, so the K in HK, that means it is a unlocked processor. That means you can easily overclock the processor and get more performance out of it than the factory allowed. These are most commonly found in desktop processors, but there are a few laptops that have this processor. An unlocked processor means that the processor multiplier is unlocked. So when paired with the proper chipset, it can be overclocked for faster than factory core speeds. Don't confuse this with turbo mode, which most CPUs come with automatically built in. So that's going to be like, you're going to have the standard base clock, and then you're going to have the turbo mode, which means what the processor can reach. So don't confuse those two. All right, next we have the H series. So this is the high performance graphics. These are most commonly seen in high performance laptops like the MacBook Pro, the Dell XPS 15, the Gigabyte Aero 15, and more. This is a high-end offering for their mobile laptop processors, and it's a 45 watt-hour processor. So it's going to consume quite a bit of power, but optimized in something like the Dell XPS 15, the MacBook Pro, the Gigabyte Aero, you're going to get some pretty solid battery life out of this processor. Next processor is the T processor. I don't have one of these for an example. The next thing we jump to is the G series. So the next processor is the T processor. And this is built specifically for optimal battery life. But actually the U series, which are right here, are actually known to get better battery life than the T series. But that is a processor they've made. I really don't see these much. It's not something you really should be concerned about, but that is a processor that you may see. And that's a 35 watt-hour processor. Not watt-hour, 35 watt processor. G series. Okay, so this includes discrete graphics on the processor. So that means that these processors come with more powerful graphics built in directly to the CPU. These processors are giving the H series a run for their money. Seriously, I mean, these are starting to step up quite a bit. And this might be some of the future of Intel's move to try and push Ryzen, but we'll see. They're found in such laptops as the HP Spectre X360, the Acer Aspire 7, and the Dell XPS 15 2-in-1. And this is a 15 watt processor. I keep saying watt hour. Okay, the next processor is the U series processor. So the U series processor stands for ultra low power. You will find on average that mobile U processors are the ones toting the best battery life among laptop options. They usually run at 15 watts and have a lower clock speed than their older brother, the H series processor. Found in a variety of laptops such as the Acer Aspire, the MSI Prestige 15, which that is a great laptop. I've been recommending that laptop a lot. Such a good laptop. And the LG Gram. In the past, these processors have been significantly underpowered, but recently are becoming quite impressive with these little guys. And this is a 15 watt processor. All right, moving forward, we have the Y series processor. This is extremely low power, so that means they consume very little power. These processors can run very low power which improves battery life but not performance. You'll find this processor in the MacBook and the MacBook Air. These are not powerful laptops. They're great processors for students or office workers completing productivity tasks such as Microsoft's Office Suite, web research, casual photo editing, maybe some graphic design work, but I don't personally recommend it. They actually pull about a third less power than the U processor. They're at 4.5 watt. That's how much power that processor is pulling. So it's a great processor for battery life, but not for performance. All right, now we have the HQ. I bring this one up because this is an older classification, but it's still important to note because you will find some of these processors from time to time. My Dell XPS 15, which I'm using right here to run this stream off of, actually is the HQ processor. This is the processor. It's the i7-7700HQ, and it's a great little processor. I do 1080p, some light 4K video editing on it, and I can do this multiple screen recording, video recording from it as well. And I've also done some live streaming. So it's a solid processor. It's not the best for like big 4K projects by any means. It gets pretty slow and glitchy, but it's still a solid processor. This is the high performance quad core. So this is when they were coming out with quad core, and that was a big deal. They put the classification directly into the SKU. It is a high performance processor with 4 cores. This was attributed to the processor back when quad core was a big deal. And so by putting that number on there, people could quickly identify, oh my gosh, that's a quad core processor. This is an amazing laptop. But now because of AMD, that's no big deal. So this classification was ditched because it honestly kind of pigeonholed them. All right, next we are moving forward to the Ryzen series processors. This is a Ryzen 3 series. We now have the Ryzen 3 4300U, which I am super stoked about. That's looking like a really great processor. I'm going to be reviewing a Acer Aspire 3 on the channel very soon with that processor, and I'm so stoked to see what that processor can do. But anyway, the Ryzen 3 is for everyday tasks, browsing the web, long battery life. Then we move forward to the Ryzen 5. This processor is great for business, design, plus light video editing and photo editing. We also are coming out with the Ryzen 5 4500U is now out. Super excited to see the performance and get into that later in this video. And I've actually reviewed the Ryzen 5 4800H. No, I reviewed the Ryzen 4800H in the Asus TUF, and I would definitely go check out that video, check out the performance. I'm actually going to include some of those benchmarks in this video though, so you don't have to watch the full review unless you totally want to. All right, moving on to Ryzen 7. This is for workflow, heavy design tasks, basic 3D animation, plus moderate to advanced video editing and photo editing. And lastly, the Ryzen 9 is the highest level of performance. This is going to be for 4K to 6K video editing, advanced 3D animation, and more. Now let's talk about the classification. So again, the H series is going to be the high performance, most commonly found in high performance laptops, commonly having a lot of hyper-threading, so like 12 cores, 16 threads, 16 cores, 32 threads, stuff along those lines. So they're going to be great for hyper-threading and multitasking. And this is going to be next on the list is the G series processor. I see these more in desktops, so you can like buy these processors and add it to your desktop PC, and this includes discrete graphics on the package. That means that these processors come with more powerful graphics built in directly to the CPU. All right, next we have the ultra low power. These are really great processors in laptops. Good performance from the Ryzen 3 3500, 3200, 3700, but this 4000 series, which I keep telling you we're going to get to, but we're going to get to it. I just want to make sure you have a solid foundation of what these processors are good for. It's really, really blowing my mind. All right, so the Ryzen U series have lower clock speeds than the H, but can run longer on a charge, and then they consume less battery. They usually do not have hyper-threading up until this point, usually 6 cores, 6 threads, but we're starting to see some hyper-threading in the newer 4000 series from the U processors. All right, now for the X series, this is the highest performance. These processors reach the highest clock speeds. Currently not available within laptops. This is a desktop processor only. And these processors are unlocked, so you can definitely overclock all of these processors. All right, so now let's get into some actual benchmark tests and see what these processors can do. As you see here with Geekbench, this is testing the single core and multi-core performance of the processors. The reason this test is important is because it tells you if you can do a lot of tasks at one time with a processor, or if this processor is really good for singular tasks and has great performance in, say, like just video editing or just Photoshop, or maybe you can run all of them at the same time. One thing I'll point out is all of the Intel processors are pretty much lumped into this same kind of area for multi-core performance. And then every processor, whether it's Ryzen or Intel, because our clock speeds are only getting so high, that means the amount of clock cycles it takes to complete an operation is only going so fast in processors at the moment. But look at the multi-core performance of the Ryzen processors. So if you're somebody who really wants to run multi-core performance, and the reason multi-core performance is important is because you could run Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, Adobe InDesign, listen to music, browse the web, all at the same time with very little performance decrease. If you're somebody who does that, then Ryzen is definitely going to be a clear choice for you. Now we're looking at the 4K export times. As you see here, this is my 2017 Dell XPS 15 with the i7 7700 HQ. So that's why that one's substantially slower than, say, this Dell XPS 15. Then we have here the Ryzen processors. These are supposed to be the big boys. These are supposed to be the super high-performing processors. So what gives? Well, what happens is quick sync. That's what happens. Adobe has optimized with Intel in order to get faster export times from their processors using a technology, a software encoding called QuickSync. So QuickSync allows the processor to be optimized for Premiere Pro, which allows the export times to be much faster. All right, so I'm going to click over next, and here are the export times I was promising y'all from the Asus TUF that I recently reviewed with the Ryzen 7 4800H. So as you see, awesome export time out of DaVinci Resolve, 6 minutes and 37 seconds. That's super up to par with the latest i7 9750H, the i7 10750H, so on and so forth. And really solid 1080p export times out of both Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve. But what happened here? Well, QuickSync happened. But recently, and thanks to our amazing YouTube friends over at Hardware Canucks, we have learned about Adobe's new encoding process called HEVC hardware encoding. So what this does is it allows the hardware of the GPU to be used to help export out of Premiere Pro. So let's say you have a GTX 1660 Ti inside of your computer. Well, that will now help with the export time when using any processor, whether it be Ryzen or Intel. So going back here, we have a 19-minute export out of the Ryzen 9 3900X. This is a desktop processor. And then when the hardware encoding is turned on, we have a 7-minute and 52-second export. That means that we are seeing a more than twice as fast export with the hardware encoding turned on. So with that in mind, with my export times on the Asus TUF, and I wish I would have done this, but I learned about this just after I had sent the computer back to Asus, or to Computer Upgrade Kings. I thank them so much for letting me use that computer, run some tests on it. I found out about this. So this is totally my fault. I'm sure some of y'all already knew about this and are going to just laugh at me in the comment section, but I can't know everything. With that in mind, however, that means that this export time, if we're following the data correctly, is going to be around a 5-minute export time. Maybe 5.5, 6 minutes at the most, which means, let's go back to our tests here. This Ryzen TUF, the Ryzen 7 4800H in the TUF A15 is going to be just as fast as all these other Intel processors. So I can officially say with some pretty solid confidence that yes, Ryzen is now becoming a very, very solid competitor in the creative professional space. Up until this point, I was not convinced. But this hardware encoding from Premiere Pro isn't just like the only thing, but it was a big hang up for me because I thought, okay, creative professionals, I use Premiere Pro almost every single day. And that would be a big bottleneck for me if I'm getting double the export time. I mean, if I have a bigger project than my average 10 to 15 minute projects, if I have a 30-minute project or a 45-minute project, for instance, like the one I'm creating right now with you guys, that's going to be like an hour and a half export time with Ryzen, Whereas with Intel, that should only be a 30-minute export time, 20 maybe. So that makes me much more confident in saying, okay, I could definitely consider Ryzen moving forward with these type of benchmarks and specs. So this is awesome news. This is the sheet I was talking about. So this is the sheet that you're going to have in the description below. And I've literally categorized all of the processors for what I think is the best use case. And then also below here, you can see that there's actually entire laptop lists with budget ranges and the average cost per laptop in the list. I am so stoked about this. Like I said, it took me over 2 months. Actually, this has been about 3 months now since I'm now reshooting this video, including Ryzen 4000. So this is an insane resource that is totally free. Just go down, grab it, and use it. And like I said, though, if you do use the link to make a purchase, I will get an affiliate commission for that. And so I'll earn a small commission. But again, it costs y'all no extra money. Okay, so let's get into the recommendations for these processors. So the first category is basic designing and photo editing. So it's going to be running one program at a time, nothing crazy, like more hobbyist photo editing and designing than professional. So this category of processors is best suited for using one design or photo editing program at a time. If you open multiple design programs, a web browser windows, and music player, you will see a decrease in speed and performance of these laptops. Albeit these are great budget CPUs, they will have their limitations. These are honestly my top recommendation for like students using Microsoft Word or doing some web browsing research. My wife had this computer. She's a nurse now, but she was a nursing major in college, and so she wrote her papers on this. She, listened to music. She did some light photo editing. It's definitely not a workhorse machine. It's something more for students. These processor categories, although they can be used for it, but they do have their limitations. All right, let's move into our next category of processors. This is processors for designing, moderate photo editing, and basic video editing. These processors will perform very well while running multiple design programs, web browsing, moderate photo editing, and some light video editing, such as 1080p and basic 4K projects. These CPUs are great for someone on a medium-sized budget. And if you go over to the laptop list, and get in kind of the basic to medium budget, you'll see that's around anywhere from $700 to about $1,100 or so. That's what I call a medium budget. The reason I call it a medium budget is because a high-end budget could be up to like $4,000 for a laptop. So everybody's budgets are different. And remember, budget does not mean cheap. Budget just means the allotted amount of money that you have for your laptop. I get that a lot on my channel. Everybody says, that's not budget, that's way expensive. Well, it depends on your budget. And so let's definitely keep that in consideration. All right, and the third category is going to be the processors for intensive designing, photo editing, and manipulation, 3D animation, and high-quality video editing, 4K, and some 6K. And keep in mind, these processors are in ascending order or descending order, ascending down. I know it's kind of confusing, but the processors ascend down. So as you move through this category, you may have this processor be great for some of these intensive design tasks because it's right at the brink of being inside of the high-end processor category. So just keep in mind when you're going through, lowest starts here and then works its way up to the highest performing down here. These processors are built to handle the heavy load that creators will put on a CPU. Now, some of these processors in the lower end of this category are not suitable for heavy 4K or 6K video editing. I would say the lower end can handle 4K pretty well, with the higher end crushing it and taking a solid hack at 6K footage. 3D animation is also something that with these processors, you'll be able to handle. And as far as graphic design is concerned, you will have zero issues with graphic design. These processors will run it very well, run multiple programs. Photo editing, yes, running multiple programs at once. Definitely be able to run those big Photoshop files with tons of layers. These are great processors for that use case. All right, now again, I mentioned that I was going to talk about how these processors are not my top recommendation. And what do I mean these processors? I'm talking about Ryzen, and this is going to be, we're going to get into this in a minute. We're actually going to do some head-to-head comparisons, and so you can guess which one will be more powerful. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's talk about why they're not my top recommendation. So the reason I'm not all full bore towards Ryzen at this exact moment, and like I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm going to be building my own PC using this new setup that I built recently. And so I'm deciding whether I'm going to use Intel or Ryzen. And the reason being is Intel just has a lot more history They have a lot more testing. They've got more capital in the market. So their stuff brings me a little more confidence. And what I mean by confidence is just that it can handle what it is set out to do. So although Intel is not killing it with performance, they've really perfected their product, whereas AMD is developing so fast. A lot of times when you're seeing new builds, so for instance, I'm getting away from laptops for this comment specifically and talking about desktop computers. We're seeing a lot of issues in like the BIOS when people go to run a new processor in an older motherboard. And those are some issues that we don't often see within Intel because Intel has such legacy in producing processors. So that's a big concern right there, is just the ability for the company or the actual component to have a great standard of quality, to have a great standard of support, to run as it says it will, so on and so forth. And the issue with me being like all gung-ho about Ryzen is there's only so many laptops that are going to have these processors right now, because it takes a year plus for a laptop company to say, yes, we want to use the next series of processors. I know a lot of people have said, why aren't there more Ryzen processors? You know, why are we seeing only a couple companies go for Ryzen? Well, because they had to make the decision 18 to 24 months ago. And so it's not like they can just say, oh my gosh, guys, all the latest Ryzen 4000 series processors came out. Hey, Ryzen, can you ship us, 10,000, 100,000 of those? And we're just going to stick them in our CPU, in our laptops. That's not how it works. They have to literally have a lead time of 18 to 24 months before they can put the processors in the laptops. So they have to make a decision before they ever see the benchmarks. It's not like us as consumers are like, oh, great benchmarks, let's go buy one. They literally have to take a bet. They have to put money out and say, I hope this was a good bet. And so that's what we're seeing here. So a lot of the companies that are now seeing these specs are going to say, great. In 18 to 24 months, they're going to get on the hook with Ryzen and say, hey, in 18 to 24 months, let's work here. Let's do some business. So that's what we're going to see, is we're not going to see a huge merge or a movement towards Ryzen just yet. But in 18 to 24 months, since these benchmarks tests are coming out, I'm pretty positive we're going to see a shift towards more Ryzen laptops. That is unless that Intel is cooking up something just amazing and everybody who's stuck with Intel made a good choice. We shall see. Okay, jumping into the head-to-head things, I thought this would be fun. I want to see if y'all can guess which processor will outperform the other. So according to, the training, so to speak, that you've had with understanding the rank of the CPU, understanding the numbering, seeing them listed out in the sheet, do you think the AMD Ryzen 2500U or the Intel i3 10220U will be better? Okay, so I'll give you a second to guess. And it's actually the newest model of the i3, the 10220U. That is 14% faster than Ryzen's older processor. You say, okay, why did you put a Ryzen 3-year-old processor up against a brand new processor? Well, the reason being is a lot of people come to my channel and they'll say, hey, I want to buy this laptop. This laptop comes with a Ryzen 5 processor. Is it a good laptop? And I'll say, I don't know. The reason I say I don't know until I take the time to do some more research for them and find out what specific Ryzen 5 processor, for instance, is it the 2500U? I don't know what Ryzen 5 means. And what I mean by that is there's so many SKU numbers behind Ryzen 5. That could be the Ryzen 5 4800H now, or it could be the Ryzen 5 2500U, which is a low performing processor. So the reason you need to know which processors can handle the performance that you're looking for is because companies often don't list the full SKU. Mainly like Microsoft and Apple. But even if you're on Amazon, sometimes they won't list the full SKU. You have to dig into the specs to find it. So that's why I think it's super important to understand what processor you're buying, not just the base level consumer numbering. Okay. Hope that makes sense. All right, next is the i5 9300H versus the i7 8650U. So this is a high performance processor versus a ultra low power processor. Which one is the winner? 23% faster is the i5 9300H than the i7 8650U. So keep these things in mind. You'll often see that a H processor is going to be substantially faster than the U processor. However, some of those new 10th series processors are getting pretty well performing. I would do my research. I would get onto something like userbenchmark.com and check out the processors to see which one is actually faster, because you don't want to get a processor that you think is faster but actually isn't. So definitely something you need to be considering. All right, the next one is the i7 1065G7 versus the latest AMD Ryzen 3 4300U. Like I said, I'm going to be getting this laptop in from Acer soon. Super excited to test it out. But according to user benchmark specs and a lot of other tests that I've been seeing on the market, the 3 series Ryzen processor, the 4300U, is 5% faster than the i7 1065G7. And this is based off of like the core performance. To me, that is really exciting because that processor, the 4300U, is going to be in some pretty affordable laptops. So I'm going to be doing some video editing tests, some benchmarks in Photoshop, some multi-core processes, some Geekbench tests, so on and so forth. And I'm really excited to see how that processor stacks up against some of the others. But that alone right there is cool. All right, next is the i7 10710U versus the i7 9750H. This is a very common processor in most creative professional laptops. That is until now the i7 10750H has come out. But I wanted to put these two head to head for you. And we have a 12% in power more with the i7 9750H over the mobile ultra low power processor. Like I said, if you're deciding between two laptops, I'd love to answer that question for you in the description below. Or you can go on to userbenchmark.com and run your own head-to-head tests there. They have a bunch of laptops and a ton of categories for you to test and see which ones perform better. They even do GPUs and stuff like that. Okay, the last one, the Intel i7 10750H versus the AMD Ryzen 9 4900HS. So this is the second to top tier i7 processor from Intel, and this is so far the highest tier processor that we can get from Ryzen. So let's see who won this match. So a 2% bump in power above Intel's latest 10 series 750H processor, which is the predecessor of this processor here. So Ryzen looking really good right now, especially with that new HEVC hardware encoding inside of Premiere Pro. They have definitely stolen my heart, and I'm super excited to see where Intel and Ryzen competition heats up moving forward in the future. All right, I'm not going to take any more of your time. Comment below if you have any questions. Definitely grab that sheet so you can see all the laptop recommendations as well as the categorization of what I think are the best performance points for each of those processors. So what are those laptop processors good for? I'm Benji Kaiser. Definitely subscribe and ring the bell if you have appreciated this content and you want to catch more content like this. Hit that like button if you've loved it, and double tap that dislike button if you have not. I will see you guys here on the next episode.